disruptive.
America that I fought for.
Weird thing to happen. Hello, one and all. Welcome to this edition of Kitz Corner. It's been a fantastic day so far. So there's some interesting news happening across the pond. So interesting and so enlightening that the establishment is worried. Because there was a recent election and a certain political commentator who's been very well known, very famous, and has been kind of on the right side of history because he's been an educator on history. He has reminded us about the importance of labor policies, has been fighting for the truth and fighting for, against corruption. And of course, that's, big no-no for the establishment. George Galloway, who is the host of the mother of all talk shows, people don't know, over in the UK, just won his by-election in Rochdale? I don't know how to pronounce that in the UK, but he won the by-election, landslide win for George Galloway. George Galloway, he's been basically an emulator for the working class and providing for a voice for working class people that are struggling in poverty and whatnot, and has been kind of this voice and kind of this, empathetic, enthusiastic person to be a fighter for real change. So, of course, that is freaking out the establishment because the minute I saw this headline, I started snooping around, the mainstream media in the UK. I started looking into the, BBC and Sky News and see their reaction. And my God, they could not handle it. They could not handle George Galloway being elected by people. They couldn't handle the fact that democratically people voted for a fighter for them. They elected someone that actually represents them. They could not have that way. So before we get into the mainstream reaction of this, I want to show George Galloway's speech when they announced his landslide victory. And here's Jackson Hinkle reporting on this, saying, "Congratulations to legendary George Galloway. I'm becoming Britain's new MP, that's member of Parliament. I feel elated knowing that Parliament will once again have a courageous voice for reason, fighting for a ceasefire in Gaza and peace with Russia." So here's what he had to say in his victory speech.
Keir Starmer, this is for Gaza. You have paid and you will pay a high price for the role that you have played in enabling, encouraging, and covering for the catastrophe presently going on in occupied Palestine in the Gaza Strip. I thank the people of Rochdale who voted for me in such numbers, but promised to work faithfully for all Rochdalians and to work for the day where you can again be born in Rochdale. Again, be born in Rochdale. I want to tell Mr. Starmer above all that the plates have shifted tonight. This is going to spark a movement, a landslide, a shifting of the tectonic plates in scores of parliamentary constituencies, beginning here in the North West, in the West Midlands, in London, from Ilford to Bethnal Green and Bow. Labour is on notice that they have lost the confidence of millions of their voters who loyally and traditionally voted for them generation after generation.
So that sounds like someone who's really going to fight hard for working class people. That sounds like a, pre-2016 Bernie Sanders speech there. Like when he says, we're going to start a revolution. That's when people got excited. That's when Bernie Sanders got noticed. That's when people were like, I can actually look up to this guy and I actually have hope for this guy. And then he turns around and says, well, I'll support Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden is a friend of mine at this point. That's when he decided to sell out, and it's just been a downward spiral ever since for Bernie Sanders. But the difference between him and George Galloway is George Galloway is actually committed. George Galloway is actually a fighter. George Galloway, when he says that there's going to be a movement, there's going to be something that's going to change the forces within Parliament, within politics in the UK, he is dead set for it. He is dead set for it. And it terrifies the UK establishment. So much so that minutes after he got elected, the Prime Minister of UK had to do an immediate press release. I kid you not. The minute he got elected, they had to rush in the oligarch king himself, Rishi Sunak, to do an immediate press release on how this was damaging the country and damaging democracy. So this is from Censored Man, or Censored Men, I should say. Men plural, not man. He says, breaking. Rishi Sunak responds to Galloway win, calls for tougher policing on pro-Palestine protests. He refers to George Galloway's Rochdale by-election win as beyond alarming. It is beyond alarming that people went out and voted for a candidate that's actually going to help them. It is beyond alarming that democracy actually works favorable for the people. It's alarming that there might actually be a representative that, oh my God, represents people. Instead of this guy who represents Wall Street, represents the banker class, who represents all the oligarchs in the UK, including his own finance company, including his own company that him and his wife made billions off of, including the fact they also made billions off the war machine, which is why he's a big supporter of Israel, why he's a big supporter of the war in Ukraine, because he's making lush funds, selling himself, selling the country out to the war effort machine, to the killing machine. So here's what Rishi Sunak had to say in response to George Galloway's win, the minute after they realized, oh crap, this guy is for real. Listen to this.
In recent weeks and months, we have seen a shocking increase in extremist disruption and criminality. What started as protests on our street has descended into intimidation, threats, and planned acts of violence. Jewish children fearful to wear their school uniform lest it reveal their identity. Muslim women abused in the street for the actions of a terrorist group they have no connection with. Now our democracy itself is a target. Council meetings and local events have been stormed. MPs do not feel safe in their homes. Long-standing parliamentary conventions have been upended because of safety concerns. And it is beyond alarming.
Beyond alarming that someone went out and voted for a candidate that does not represent the hard-working 1% that's screwing over the general public, that got us into the war in the first place. God forbid this guy is going to challenge the war efforts. This is beyond alarming. This is a threat to democracy. Well, what exactly is the threat? People were being democratic. They were voting for a guy that was going to challenge the status quo that I develop. Oh my God. This is hilarious. This is absolutely hilarious. And the fact that they're noting that there's going to be more crime, that democracy's in ruins because of George Galloway getting into office. It's amazing. Is that supposed to be a threat or a promise from the Prime Minister? Is that a threat or a promise? Is the oligarchy so outraged that they're promising that there's going to be more crime out there to frame on George Galloway? I mean, that sounds like an insider conspiracy, but it's happened. And no doubt they'll probably try to ploy something against George Galloway because, again, they cannot have someone who challenges the status quo. They can't have someone in office that is willing to challenge the trillion-dollar bloodshed war industry that this guy, his wife, and other people have partaked into and invested so much of their resources and capitalized off the death and disparity of people in Palestine, and people of Gaza, and people of Ukraine, and many, many other wars that they have capitalized throughout.
Tonight, the Rochdale by-election returned a candidate who dismisses the horror of what happened on October the 7th, who glorifies Hezbollah, and is endorsed by Nick Griffin, the racist former leader of the BNP. I need to speak.
So there you go. They're trying, now they're doing the Donald Trump method of trying to link him to some racist. And apparently that George Galloway is a racist. They're trying to do everything possible to link George Galloway in awful light so that people are dismissed by him, but then be okay with this creepy ass oligarch who nobody elected in office. Democracy is such a threat that no one even elected this guy to be prime minister. First it was Boris Johnson, then it was Liz Truss with her stunt, and then this guy showed up. Did anyone have the chance to write this guy's name? Do they even know how to write this guy's name? I don't think there's no paperwork. There's no paperwork to say that he was democratically elected. But look at him. He's the prime minister. Look at his shiny face. Yay. I am working all for the bankers. Yay. And Liz Truss finally came out and admit that, these people work for the bankers. They're not leaders. They are puppets. They are mascots. And the people we should be worried about are the people behind this guy that are no doubt writing these speeches and manufacturing consent saying that George Galloway is somehow connected to racism and it's going to bring terror and it's going to bring crime and it's going to bring a downward spiral of democracy, even though democracy has already been in shambles because of pricks like him. Because of nefarious ghouls at the helm of leadership that screwed over so many people that they have no other alternatives. They're in dire straits that a figure like George Galloway is like a miracle to happen. So of course he wins by a landslide because someone out there who's running as a representative is going to represent people. We thought that was going to happen with AOC. We thought that was going to happen with Bernie. We thought that was going to happen with the rest of the squad. We thought that with any politician. I thought that with Tulsi. But they didn't represent. At least George Galloway is an actual representative. George Galloway actually gives a crap about what's going on. George Galloway is actually going to fight and serve for the people. This guy hasn't done squat. This guy is serving the oligarchy and fighting you because you decided to be democratic and vote for an alternative. So now he's promising that it's going to be an absolute mess and there's going to be massive crime and it's going to be an outrage. Oh my God, how dare we? How dare you turn the UK into this? And you want to know one of the reasons why they're so outraged at George Galloway? Because George Galloway, especially on his show, the mother of all talk shows, is a challenging voice, a challenger to the status quo, to the official narrative. And George Galloway doesn't just mess around. He's not blurting random things out. George Galloway is there to educate people. So I want to show this clip here of an interview or a phone call that he had on the mother of all talk shows. And George Galloway got a phone call from a Zionist from a Zionist pro-Israel supporter, and George Galloway is going to educate him about the history of the formation of Israel and also about the ethics when it comes to this war, because everyone is talking about war crimes. Everyone's talking about the illegal atrocities that's happening right now, the illegal occupation in Gaza. They're talking about the genocidal efforts in Gaza. They're talking about the humanitarian exploitation that's happening in Gaza. The fact that these people are stricken from food and water and shelter and electricity. Those are all offensive war crimes. Those are all be punishable by international law. But the problem is that Israel, much like the United States and how they're getting away with their war crimes, is they're not recognized by the international courts. Because if they were, we'd be the ones in the West here getting the slap. We're the ones committing international terror and war crimes all over the world. So, of course, we're not going to be involved with the international court system because we want to get away with our criminal activity while promoting that we're doing it for democracy reasons and humanitarian crisis and all this other crap. Manufacturing consent saying that war is good. Oh, we're killing people for good, for peace. We just got to manslaughter an entire nation, and then finally, we'll have some freedom and values, Western wholesome values. You just got to liberate and destroy everybody, eliminate entire towns. So here's George Galloway educating a Zionist about Israel. And this is one of the reasons why Rishi Sunak and the UK establishment are petrified of George Galloway entering an office. Watch this.
On the subject of the Palestinians, here's Alex in North London. Alex, go ahead, sir.
Hi George, I'm calling from North London. I've been listening to you for 3 months now.
Okay.
Never had the chance to speak to you.
Okay.
But I was just calling I was listening to you a couple of nights ago, and you were talking to these people, and they were saying that Israel, the Jews, did not have the right to gain Israel from the Palestinians. And I was just saying, throughout history, the Jews have been persecuted, obviously, from the Holocaust, and we were granted Israel as a result of this. And I feel that...
Granted by whom?
We were granted...
So, before we get into this, because George Galloway is going to school this guy, I just want to say, because you get so much smack on the internet, you get so much smack through social media. There has been this propagandized, just like what happened with Russia and Ukraine, just like what happens all around with COVID, this massive globalized propagandized stunts that you see on social media. And and one of the things that I just find so fascinating when it comes to all this and the arguments you hear from, pro-Israel or Zionist people is they mention about the Holocaust. They mention about how Jewish people have been oppressed throughout history. And, that it's acknowledgeable that Jewish people were oppressed at one point, and there were casualties. There were times where, some sort of persecution against Jewish people. We can acknowledge that. But to go from the Holocaust, which was persecution by Germans and European Nazi coalitions, Nazi militias, going and targeting Jewish citizens in European nations, to then go and do the exact same motives to Middle Easterners is just insane. It is just insane that you're copying the same actions that you're calling victim for. You're crying out the victim for. You've been, having to deal with this your whole life with the Holocaust. Then you do this exact same actions to the Palestinians. It's just so, it's mind blowing that people can go from one horrific incident and The only thing they take away from that is we got to do the exact same thing to another group of people that have nothing to do with the Holocaust. Palestinians had nothing to do with the Holocaust. That was Europeans. That was Europeans, ethnic Europeans in Germany, in other nations in Europe. That had nothing to do with Palestine. Had nothing to do with Middle Easterners. Had nothing to do with Arab nations. But it's amazing that they use that as an excuse and can't even see the connection. They can't see that they're not having a connection.
Granted from Britain and other countries, granted us that.
But what right did Britain have to grant you somebody else's country?
Well, it's due because we lost 6 million people.
No. I'm not arguing about that. I'm going to come on to that. But what right did Britain have to grant you somebody else's country?
We had the right because we lost 6 million people and we did not have a home.
Well, yeah, I'm going to ask you for a third time. What right did Britain have to grant you somebody else's country?
Well, they didn't. Well, they were giving us the right because it was they were basically gave us because of the.
But they gave you somebody else's country. That's the point I'm making, Alex. Can you deal with it?
Yeah, but the Jews have also had to. They've dealt with this throughout history.
Well, Alex, I don't know if you came on with a script and you can't deviate from it. Can you please answer that point? And we'll come to the Holocaust and who was responsible for it and who should have paid and what they should have paid for it. But given that you've said Britain granted you, and you're presumably saying you because you're Jewish, somebody else's country, I'm asking you, what right did Britain have to grant you somebody else's country?
Britain, you could say they didn't have a right, but they came in and dealt with us and with the Jews having lost all these lives, and they basically granted us this land. Okay.
Well, I see I'm getting nowhere on this, Alex, so let me deal with your overarching point. Maybe you're just not equipped to deal with the principal point that I have made. The Jews have suffered racist anti-Semitism down the ages in many, many European countries, including our own. They were subject to regular discrimination at best and pogrom and murder at most. That's undoubtedly true. The one place in the entire world that Jews were neither discriminated against nor subject to pogrom was the Muslim world. In fact, so much was that the case that when Christianity came back to power in Spain, in Andalusia, in the western extent of the Islamic Empire, when the Muslims left, the Jews left with them because they feared the Christian anti-Semitism which would be unleashed in the wake of the departure of the Islamic civilization in the West. That's why so many Jews are to be found even today, and were to be found in profusion before the creation of the State of Israel, in countries like Morocco and along the North African coast, because under the protection of the Muslims, the Jews left Europe and went to live in North Africa. The Palestine that was wiped off the map when Britain granted you somebody else's country had Jews living side by side with Christians and Muslims for century upon century without the slightest trace of discrimination or violence or pogrom. So, what's happened is that Christian anti-Semitism in Europe, which massacred 6 million Jews in the greatest crime in human history, was paid for not by the Christian countries of Europe that either practiced or turned a blind eye to that anti-Semitism, but was paid by the very people who were completely innocent of that Holocaust, who had never persecuted the Jews, who had never pogromed the Jews. And that seems to me to add insult to the injury suffered by a people whose country was wiped off the map, who were dispersed into exile, to make way for a Zionist idea which was granted to European Jews, because these were the first settlers, granted to European Jews by Britain. And as you have singularly failed, 4 times I asked you, to acknowledge that Britain had no right to give away somebody else's country, one country giving to a second people, the land that actually belonged to a third people, it seems to me an all-round injustice, don't you think, Alex?
Yeah, I agree that they didn't so much have the right, but they were stepping in after the Holocaust to grant it to the Jews. But it was
It was long before the Holocaust that Britain stepped in. Britain stepped in 1917 with the Balfour Declaration made by the British Minister Balfour on our behalf to a group of atheistic Zionist Jews. I make the point about atheism because it's now claimed that this is some biblical land right, as if God was an estate agent. The men to whom Israel was promised were atheistic Jews. They were not only not speaking for all Jews, they represented at that time in 1917 a tiny proportion of the world's Jews. Most of the world's Jews supported communist or socialist parties and ideas at that time. The Zionists represented a tiny sliver of Jewish opinion at that time. Yet Balfour promised them the land which belonged to a third people, without consulting either the British or the world's Jews, and least of all, consulting the Palestinians.
Okay, well, thanks very much for talking.
Okay, Alex, thanks for listening, my friend.
So, you could tell that the caller was getting a bit nervous when he kind of draw a blank and be like, oh, this guy is actually studied up on this. He's actually pointing out logical facts. He's actually reminding us of important dates and how things are connected and why you bringing up the Holocaust is nowhere related to the formation of Israel. And exactly the formation of his question, which is really an excellent question to ask. How did the UK grant the right for Israel to exist in another territory? How exactly how does the British Empire have the right to grant land from another territory to another group of people? Like, it seems so crazy. It seems so crazy. It'd be like if Canada decide, hey, we're going to take Greenland and give it to a bunch of South African people, even though Greenland is part of Denmark. It's not even our territory. It's part of Denmark. Greenland's part of Denmark. But we decide as Canadians, we're just going to give that land to some other group of people without any sort of consultations, any sort of negotiations, diplomatic solutions, no whereabouts whatsoever. We're just going to come in, we'll put out a spread, and just hope for the best. And if you look at what the CIA has involved in this, because yes, the intelligence communities have a huge part in the formation of Israel. Many people don't know about this, but if you look at documentations, we covered it on this channel here. If you look at the documentations of the formation of Israel, it's pretty clear the reason why exactly in this geopolitical location they fomented this country that was supposed to be a safe haven for Jewish people, but yet has the highest intelligence, has the highest military ranking across all Middle East countries. I wonder why specifically in this area, geographically in this spot, they decide, hey, wouldn't this be a great place for Jewish settlers? Just saying, if we're concerned about the Holocaust, if that was the big heightened point of why we need a safe space for the Jewish community and for Jewish people, why are we not taking part of the German land? Why are we not taking a part of Germany when World War II ended and Germany was broken up? Why are we not giving a formation of that to the Jewish people as a peace offering, as a diplomatic solution and resolve to the end of World War II? Why exactly Palestine? No one seems to be able to answer that in the Zionist world, but George Galloway puts it perfectly. George Galloway educates the person to the point that, oh, I gotta leave, so click. So there you go, folks. That is why the UK establishment is terrified of this guy, terrified of a podcaster, terrified of a great interviewer, terrified of a guy who might, oh my God, represent working people in their struggles with the oppression of the oligarchy. Because my God, having a democratic vote to elect someone into office who might represent them the best way possible is terrifying. It's alarming. And so much so that we got to stop everything and terrify you by saying that electing George Galloway is going to lead to crime. It's going to lead to a more of a police state. Democracy's in shambles. And Rishi Sunak almost had to cry on cue. Oh my God, it's just terrifying.